Hello everyone, and welcome to another Dense Solutions Nanotalk. This Nanotalk is a recording of a climate user webinar that we did with Dr. Utkur Mirsaidov from the National University of Singapore. In this Nanotalk, Dr. Utkur will discuss the formation and catalytic behavior of platinum nanoparticles via In Situ TEM. So now we will switch the recording, and first you will see me introduce the speaker, and shortly after we will switch to his presentation. So please enjoy this Nanotalk. So, of course, the warmest welcome to Dr. Utkur from the Department of Physics and the Department of Biological Sciences from the National University of Singapore. I wanted to take a few minutes to introduce Dr. Utkur. So Dr. Utkur Mirsaidov obtained both his bachelor's and PhD degrees in physics from the University of Texas at Austin for magnetism and low temperature physics. Afterwards, during 2006 to 2009, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Beckman Institute of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he worked on the design and nanofabrication of single-molecule biosensor devices for DNA sequencing. In the beginning of 2010, he moved to Singapore to start developing in situ liquid cell TM platforms for imaging soft and biological materials. In August of 2013, he started as an assistant professor of physics and biology at the National University of Singapore, and is now an associate professor in the same departments. His research focuses on understanding fundamental chemical and physical processes for the synthesis and application of nanomaterials and the development of advanced electron microscopy techniques for material application. So very warm welcome to you, Dr. Utkur, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Lana. That's a nice introduction. Yeah, so it's when you were just listing what I've done in the past, it seems like I started from low temperature physics, biology, now back to material science. So it's like it has been a very exciting journey. And then I think the In Situ TEM that I'm doing right now is one of the most exciting parts, because there are a lot of questions that I was wondering, and now actually I can see and answer them. So without further ado, let me start. So this talk, I was debating on how I should structure this talk. Should it be mostly focused on the phenomena or science part, or mostly on the microscopy part? So I tried to settle somewhere in between. So I don't know how it's going to come out. We'll see. So this work is actually based off the work of two of my star people in my group. One is CV, so he's a group leader now at the Max Planck Institute at Fritz Haber Institute, and Xu Fentan, who is a postdoc at MIT. So mainly I'm going to be only talking about their work. So they are the ones who got exposure to the most of the dense instruments. Okay, so I guess not many of you don't need this slide, but it's kind of a motivation for the talk, right? So there is a lot of processes, a lot of phenomena that you can't really observe with any means but electron microscopes. So because of the vacuum, it limits a lot of it limits the number of phenomena that we can study, right? So we are mostly limited to studying the processes that only occur in a vacuum. But with the recent development in the in situ microscopy, specifically in the silicon nitride-based chips, we can do now a lot of things in a more or less realistic conditions: gas, liquid. We can do electrical biasing, heating, and so on. Nowadays, there are options where you can introduce or excite the reactions with laser light. So our group uses holders from different vendors. And now, what I'm going to be mostly focusing on the holders from dense solution, but we tested a lot of them, and we came to a conclusion that there are times where you want to really rely on a commercial holder, but also you want to build your own holders too. So while we use a lot of commercial holders, we also design and build our own holders. So for specific applications where we cannot use dense holders, for example, if you want to do like very nasty chemicals, right? So very corrosive chemicals, and you don't want to ruin very expensive holders, or you want to design your holder tip in such a way that that it doesn't react with a specific type of a chemical. For that, we also design our own holders to complement the commercial instruments. We also design our own chips. To do these experiments, we have a clean room facility and everything, a machining facility, so everything is also done here. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be giving a few examples of how these holders, how these in situ holders can be used to probe processes that occur in a liquid, gas, under different heating or electrochemical biasing conditions. And I'm going to be mainly focusing on bimetallic nanoparticles because it's a really nice, simple toy system where you can explore a lot of phenomena, both in liquid, gas, and vacuum. And they also have an added benefit because most of the catalytic materials tend to be bi or polymetallic because the synergy between different metals enhances catalytic activity. Also, since most catalysts are precious metals, it also reduces loading of the precious metals and reduces cost of the catalyst. So first, I'm going to demonstrate how we can use the, for example, liquid holder to monitor the overgrowth process or the reaction where the core-shell nanoparticles form. So we did this experiment a few years ago where we could actually monitor a nanorod, how it evolves in two different distinct structures. Just by tuning the temperature. So if you start with a nanorod, if you do your reaction, overgrowth reaction of a palladium at a room temperature, you predominantly deposit palladium in the tips of the nanorod. But if you crank up the reaction temperature, you end up in this kind of a coffin type of geometry where you have a nanoparticle embedded in this cuboidal shape. And in situ liquid cell TEM, for example, allows you to monitor how this process is happening or how this process are proceeding. So for the room temperature reaction is very straightforward. You load your reaction solution, you load your nanoparticles, and you watch under extremely low electron dose to be careful that the beam does not affect your reaction. And you see how actually it's evolved, right? So it's actually depositing on the sides, but most predominantly depositing on the tops. And the reason why it's depositing on the tops because these nanoparticles are coated with the surfactants. And the affinity of the surfactants to the top and the bottom of the nanorod is less, so they're less coated, and that's where the predominantly most of the gold or palladium atoms from the solution deposit. Now, if you crank up the temperature, again, here you have nanorods. What you see, they're actually slowly, these nanorods, well, I guess not slowly, but quite rapidly, they evolve into these coffin structures. And this can be, because you can visualize, and I'm not going to go into too much detailed analysis of what we've done here, you can see you can rationalize what's happening by a very classical model where the which says that either the growth is controlled kinetically or it's controlled thermodynamically. So this is a model that was put forward by Yunan Xie from Georgia Tech. So at a low temperature, most of your palladium atoms deposit at the. Most of your palladium atoms deposit predominantly on the tip. But since at a low temperature the diffusivity of atoms are low, they kind of end up staying at the tip, and then your tip grows. But if you increase the temperature of the reaction, then what you do, you actually now cranking up the diffusion or diffusivity of this atom, and the surfactant molecules that are attached to the surface are also in a kinetic equilibrium, so they can detach and attach, which allows these atoms that are depositing at the tip of the nanorod to diffuse to form a cuboidal shape, but also atoms can deposit directly from the solution. And since you have a lot of surfactant in the solution, it predominantly dictates that nanoparticle going to grow into cuboidal shape where the facet energy with the facet energies with the lowest facet energies exposed to the solution. Okay, so this is okay. So if this is one way of forming from a monometallic nanoparticle a bimetallic nanoparticle, right? So, but these two metals are very well segregated. Now, can we take these nanoparticles where the metals are segregated and then convert them into maybe alloy structures? And actually, the answer is yes. And this is how you do it. You just crank up the diffusion of atomic species within of the segregated metal, so they kind of mix and then form a alloy nanoparticle. And this experiment, this particular experiment, we've done actually with Dense's wildfire holder. That was a very quick. Maybe I should just really comment here. It was like a really few days of worth of experiment where we managed to obtain all the data and publish. It was that was one of the first time we used the dense product, and we're quite happy. So let me basically tell you a little bit about what you expect to happen before I even go into the describing the data, right? So let's say you have a bimetallic nanoparticle with a very well-defined interface. Of course, none of the metals are perfect, so there are going to be vacancies inside of them. And once you start heating them up, when the interface between these two attached metals gonna start moving, right? And this is because of the difference in their interdiffusion rates. One metal species diffuses faster inside another metal species, and as a consequence, you start forming voids. And why do voids form? It's because of the vacancies. As the particles are mixing, so vacancy is gonna flow towards the faster diffusing metal, right? So because all your metal is moving away or diffusing into the slower metal, and the vacancies from the other metal gonna diffuse in, and usually they form very stable voids, and these voids are most of the time, I should say, they're pinned. They don't move, right? So you start forming this hollow void structures, and this is referred as a classical Kirkendall effect. And we set out to explore this. We wanted to make an alloy nanoparticle and see what happens. So we prepared two sets of the nanoparticles or diffusion couples. In one of them, gold was in the center and the palladium was on the surface, and then we reversed the geometry, so just to look at what happens. And this is basic experimental schematic. Any of you who use a wildfire probably familiar with that, right? So you have you put a particle on this on their commercial chip, and we just heat it, and then we monitor what happens. And we do this experiment at different temperatures and then see how the diffusion happens. So you see at a low temperature, diffusion is quite slow. As the temperature goes up, you start seeing noticeable diffusion, and as you start heating it up, let's say at this 650, it always intermixes, kind of forming an alloy, right? So in this case, essentially, gold and the palladium are mixing. So, but keep in mind, palladium we'll see in a bit, but palladium is actually diffuses faster than the gold. And how I mean, so this is actually known from the literature, but based on this data, on this EDX data from this from individual nanoparticles, you can actually extract this. So what you do, so you look at you map out a profile of your core as it changes, right? So it's at t equals 0, you have a very sharp edge profile, and as you heat for a longer and longer, you see this profile is becoming diffuse, and this is a standard double-sided error function from which you can extract the diffusion coefficient. I mean, the details is in CV's paper, so I'm not going to go into this, but you can really, from this, you can actually figure out what is the diffusion coefficient, because diffusion with the temperature should behave like a Arrhenius type, should have Arrhenius type behavior. And activation energy for diffusion is about 1.6 eV. But if you look at the STEM images carefully, right? So what you see voids forming at the interface between these two metals, here, here, here. I don't know if the contrast is good enough and you guys can see it, but the voids are forming. So this is information you cannot get from a simple diffusion measurements, but since we are monitoring, we can measure the bulk property like interdiffusion, and we can also see what kind of structural changes happening at the material. So this is one of the movies. I don't know if you can see it, but there is this voids forming, and as you see, these voids are quite easily moving around, right? So these are the movie. So this is actually tracks the position of the void as a function of time. They're jumping around. So again, this is already shows you that voids are not stuck. They actually diffuse, or they actually move around. And this motion is intermittent, right? So they jostle around and then jump and jostle around and jump. So, but these voids also then eventually they move to the surface and then to the surface, and then they just disappear. So one key point here to note is on a classical Kirkendall effect, you expect from a classical Kirkendall description, you expect them to be stuck and grow in size as you heat. But this is not what we see. These are very flexible. And why? Well, because these nanoparticles are single crystal and they don't have a lot of defects. These voids usually tend to get stuck at the defects. And I'm not going to show the data, but we've done experiment. When you have a nanoparticle that has a defect, voids get stuck there and then they start growing. And in a bulk metal is full of defects. And that's why exactly these voids get pinned at the defects and then they can grow. But if you have a very uniform, single crystal nanoparticle, that's actually not what happens. These things can go, these things are very mobile. They can get intermittently pinned, but they eventually disappear or annihilate once they reach the surface of the overall nanoparticle. So that was gold in a palladium. You can do the same thing with palladium in gold again. Then you can, so you will reverse the geometry. So we put the palladium in the center and the gold outside, and then you can measure the diffusion for the palladium. And here, same deal. So you're doing exactly the same thing. Here you find the diffusion of the palladium is, the activation energy for the diffusion is lower. So palladium diffuses faster, as you expect. And these numbers in a very good agreement with the literature values. But again, same thing. You have voids forming, right? So this is the same thing. You can monitor the structural changes, and this can be really explained through DFT simulation. So before I even go to explain to you, I just want to know this is what you see in a classical Kirkendall effect, right? So you have interdiffusion, voids start nucleate in a matter and in a material, and the interface kind of diffuses around. But what we see in most cases, the nucleation of the voids happens right at the interface. And this can be understood if you just look at the vacancy formation energy, calculated vacancy formation energy diagram here. And what we have is what this diagram says. So keep in mind, this is palladium is red color and the gold is green color. So this is so vacancy formation energy in the bulk gold is the lowest, right? So gold, the vacancy in a gold would not want to diffuse towards palladium, even though palladium is a fast diffusing metal. The energy barrier associated with this with the diffusion of the palladium. With the diffusion of the gold into palladium is going to be higher. So that's why you do not see movement of the vacancy from gold toward faster diffusing species, but it either hangs around at interface or annihilates on the surface. But on the case of palladium, you actually see it forms at the interface, but then it still continues and moves out to the surface and annihilates at the surface of the gold. So it can move because of this downward trend in the energy. Okay, so we can grow metal on a particle. We can intermix metals on of the bimetallic nanoparticles. What else can we do? Can we actually now take the metal nanoparticle and control its architecture by some other means? And the answer is, of course, yes. Otherwise, I would not be talking about it. And now I'm going to switch to this corrosion or etching of how we can corrode one template nanoparticle to form another nanoparticle. So it's also going to be an alloy nanoparticle, right? So we start with one type of a template metal, and then we're going to etch it, and then with a different type of metal, and then we create an alloy particle. And this we usually do it through a galvanic replacement reaction. And actually, galvanic replacement reaction is one of the common methods used to create hollow nanostructures, right? So in the reaction, and it can be really, the mechanism behind is very simple, right? So etching or corrosion reaction occurs because there is a when you have two different metals or one metal and the salt of another metal in a solution, and when they come into contact, because of the electrochemical difference in the electrochemical potential, the metal with a higher or more noble metal can actually deposit on the surface, and then when it reacts, it can take away more number of the atoms, right? So it's essentially the metal with a higher electrochemical potential deposits on the surface, and then it corrodes the one which is less noble. So here, here I'm showing just the reaction for the gold and the silver. You have a silver underlying core metal, and then let's say you have a gold salt or gold ions in your solutions, which is 3+. And when it deposits, what happens is it creates 3 silver salts, which then dissolve in the solution, right? So this is how you essentially hollow the silver out. And then as gold continuously deposits on the surface, what you will end up with, you just end up with a shell kind of structure, but the interior of the material gets etched away. And how this etch happens, the basic schematic is described here. So you have a template material, you have you're depositing, in this case, gold or from a gold chloride solution, and what you have is you will have a pinholes through here where the reaction can occur, and the gold can go inside and then slowly corrode it away and eat it away, and you end up with a hollow nanoparticle. And again, this can be looked by using the in situ liquid cell, and that's what exactly we did. So we wanted to see how silver nanoparticles corrode when we introduce a gold chloride solution, and see how the galvanic replacement reaction actually proceeds. So here's the movie of what's happening. Let me see. Okay, so I have to go a bit faster. So what you see here is so you see the shell deposition. This is the thickness, and you see the pits forming, and pits predominantly form at the edges, and then they kind of eat away, right? So and then they kind of eat into the silver, and silver dissolves, and you have this hollow nanoparticles. Note we do not observe any holes, but it's really hard to say from these images. But I'm going to come back to this point in a bit. But what we see formation of the nanobox, and at the later stages we see clearly when the whole structure starts decomposing, we see the holes or pits forming on the surface of the structure. But at the initial part of the reaction, as this thing is diffusing out, as this silver is getting eaten away, we do not clearly see, or we do not detect any visible any visible pits on the surface, as I described or alluded earlier from a basic description of the galvanic replacement reaction. And you can actually take the samples, look at them under EDX to make sure that, yes, that you have a gold on the surface, silver is getting etched away, and then actually the surface is gold-silver alloys forming, and of course, since you have a solution, chlorine in a solution, it also deposits on it, right? But essentially, you see this entire reaction happening, and all the elements are in the right, more or less in the right place. Okay, so how can we be confident? How can we be confident that that there is no hole forming? Okay, so this reaction was done at 90 degrees, right? And it kind of proceeds quite fast, and we don't know what's happening. But one thing that you should know from the earlier part of my talk, where I described the Kirkendall effect, you might want to consider that there might be an interdiffusion happening at this interface between the two metals, and actually that's going to be the key message of this observation. So again, just to remind you, this is what classically you think. That's for the actually people done it exactly for the cubes, and for the cubes you also expect the holes or pits form, and then your noble metal solution goes in and then kind of eats it away, and eventually your material decomposes. But the pits are critical part for the galvanic replacement reaction. So here, what we did next, we actually reduced the temperature. So we wanted to see what happens. So if the experiment, what we observed is actually pit, if it's through the pits, then you should at any point you should always etch the core. If you have a hole, then something should diffuse and eat away the core. So when we look at this movie, so you see the deposition on the surface is happening. It's not clear if there is a pits or not, but since the reaction is slow enough, we can see, okay, so hollowing happens right at the corner of the metals. And so and then it's slowly etching away. Same here, same here. So it's not pointed out. And what you have next, so okay, so what you have next, now you have this particle detached. That's the core detached. So core is the silver detached, and nothing happens until the particle falls apart. And then after it falls apart, then it's gonna go etch, but nothing happens, right? So the particles interface detached, so it detached from the shell, and nothing happens. Now it's just eating it away. So what's happening is actually you have the silver is diffusing out through its contact to the deposited shell, and once this contact is broken, what happens is the silver or this core silver remains in place. So that's why you end up with this kind of architect, with this kind of structure. If you had a pit hole, so it would have just, if it was etching through the pit, then you would have just, you would not stop at this point of the reaction when you have just detached silver. Okay, so this was the experiment with the. I should stop. This was the experiment with the gold 3+, right? So gold chloride 4-. Now, what happens if we use gold chloride 2, right? So you have now gold 1+, right? So gold 3+, each gold atom takes away 3 silver atoms. Now, instead of taking away 3 silver atoms, you're going to use gold 1+, you only take away 1 silver atom. So you're taking away at a much, much slower rate. If you're taking it away at a much, much slower rate, but you're continuously depositing the gold shell, then what's going to happen is, So your deposition is continuing, but you're also you're taking it at a much slower rate. So you're etching inside, and then silver that's etched diffuses. So you form a silver gold alloy, but new gold material comes depositing on the surface, and what ends up happening is you form double-shelled nanostructure, because now this new gold on the surface is acting as a diffusion couple for this interlayer, right? So you have this gold. You have a gold-silver alloy. Of course, there is also some chlorine involved there, but nevertheless, a new layer that deposits now acts as another layer which hollows this layer. So you can really create double shell structures if you just by tuning the diffusion or the reaction rates. Okay, so I think I told you how we can really control this nanoparticle architectures, right? So by growth, by annealing, or by etching. So now, can we take these nanoparticles and then use them or test them in some chemical reaction? And the easiest or the most elegant and the simplest model reaction is a reaction of CO oxidation, where the carbon monoxide reacts with the oxygen, and CO2 or carbon dioxide is produced. And this reaction, even though it's a model reaction and it's studied a lot, it is extremely important, because it's most of the cars, the exhaust that's coming out from the cars is the CO. So you have to be able to efficiently convert them, or any other toxic gases. But CO also essential building block for this value-added products in different synthesis reactions. And there is a lot of there is a lot of literature on a CO oxidation, but not CO oxidation. A lot of different catalytic reactions as well, using the Operando spectroscopy methods, or some other type of quench and loop experiments. But none of them reveal how this catalyst transforms during the reaction. So here, what we set out to do is we really wanted to see what happens to catalyst as it converts carbon monoxide into carbon dioxide. And for that, we used climate holder from a dense solution, and that was a very so this was the first time actually we did the gas experiment, palladium platinum nanoparticles, and it was quite. Once I saw the movies, I was quite impressive. Even though it's really, because the gap. So you have a 1 atmosphere pressure, and you have a micron gap. Even though you can't get to desired pressure at this very desired resolution at this high pressures, but nevertheless you can really get the lattice resolution. You can start inferring what's going on structural in these materials. So here, this is a basic setup for the climate. You have a reactant gas or a mixture of reactant gas, whatever coming in. You deposit your nanoparticles. In this case, we deposited the palladium nanoparticles, and you start flowing the gas. You start recording image. At the same time, the output of your cell is connected to a mass spec, and then you can monitor what's happening with the reactants and the products, and you can control the temperature. And that's exactly what we did. So we combined this mass spec with the TEM to see what happens to the nanoparticles under the reaction conditions. Okay, so first when we introduced oxygen, at a room temperature, or not room, but low 200 C, nothing happens. But then we start introducing CO. So CO to oxygen is a ratio is a 0.5 here. And what we see, the nanoparticle starts faceting up. It starts forming low index facets, so 111 and 200. And here, for example, at this corner, it even starts forming this edge facets that are 111. Oh, I mean, staircase or like sawtooth facets that are 111. Well, but nothing happens at 300 degrees or 200 degrees, right? So no reaction is going on. There is no CO2 being produced. And we slowly increase the temperature. And when the temperature reaches 500 degrees, we see the CO production. As we see the CO production, we can currently see how the active nanoparticle looks like, right? So active nanoparticle is distinctly different from this one because it has all rounded faces, right? So it's not now faceted, but it has a lot of so all these edges or corners disappear, creating a lot of uncoordinated sites, and that's where the actually reaction takes place, and that's what's responsible for catalytic activity. So I'm not going to go into details, but I'll allude to it in the next few slides. But essentially, the distinct difference with the palladium here, what's happening inactive is a very faceted, sharp, and as you increase the temperature, it's becoming catalytically active, and a lot of CO2 is being produced. So this is our ramp up temperature. So we are ramping up temperature from inactive to active. And you see, once you reach 450, so it's faceted originally, as your temperature hits right about 450 or so, nanoparticle becomes rounded. And this 450 corresponds to the point where it transitions from a catalytically inactive to an active state. And this is a time. I don't know if your movie is playing well on your computer or not, but if not, but this is the shape of the nanoparticle at different temperatures. So you have a faceted, and all of a sudden rounded. And quite interestingly, what you can also do while you're monitoring, so not only monitor the CO2 production or the products using the mass spec, but you can also monitor the heater, what the heater is doing. And what we see with the heater is as we ramp up the temperature, once we hit this 450 or so, you see a sudden drop. You see a sudden drop in the power that's supplied to a heater, right? So this point corresponds with the structural change that occurs with a nanoparticle, right? So this restructuring is really this point and the transition of the particle really coincide. So why is this happening? Well, I mean, you can treat this as a kind of a calorimetry experiment, right? CO oxidation is an exothermic reaction. So as soon as you kickstart the reaction, nanoparticles release the heat, and your feedback mechanism dials down. And then you can also monitor the temperature at the same time through this resistive measurements. As it dials down, this corresponds to the point where the nanoparticle becomes active. And since it's exothermic reaction, you also can read out that the temperature is jumping. So this point is called the ignition point of the reaction, and this signifies where the transition occurs. And that right at that point, the structural change happens. Okay, so that was done for the CO to oxygen when the ratio of the partial pressure for the CO and the oxygen was 0.5. Now, what happens if we change that ratio? So if we increase the CO content, well, we can increase the CO content, and you can do exactly the same experiments and monitor what happens. But when you do that, what you see is now this ignition point shifts from 450 to about 500, and or your particle becomes catalytically active at a higher temperature, and it kind of makes sense. So again, I'm going to skip a lot of details, but what happens is why these facets form? Because when CO binds to the nanoparticle surface, it actually stabilizes the nanoparticles with a low index facets. So when this nanoparticle surface is stabilized with low index facets, and if you increase the partial pressure, you actually need a higher ignition, or you have to increase your ignition temperature to start the reaction, because now your surface is contaminated or loaded with CO. And if you make the pressure even higher, then the amount of the CO on the surface is higher, and that's what's happening. So with the increased content of CO, your ignition temperature is going up. But nevertheless, we see the same behavior, right? So when it's a reaction, your CO goes down, CO2 goes up, and you can easily read out what's happening. So you can not only monitor the structural changes, but you can also monitor the outcome of the reaction, but also monitor what's happening to your nanoparticles. So you can do a kind of a small nanoscale calorimetry experiment for this reaction. We did the same experiment with platinum, just to compare with the palladium. And in platinum experiments, the changes were subtle, but also so we didn't consist. So if you look at the product, at the output, the platinum gives you a very subtle change in the production of CO2, but consistently the structural changes in the platinum was also not as vivid as in the case of the palladium, right? So in the case of the palladium, you have a really drastic change going from here to here, and correspondingly, the activity of the reaction was high. And so this is actually multiplied by 4 times. And of course, if you increase the temperature, the activity increases. So we multiplied by 4 just to make it more, to exaggerate. Otherwise, it's really hard to see what's going on. And this is again. So in the case of for example, if you go back if you go back here, you go on state and you're fully on, right? So and if you increase temperature from 500 to 600, there is no noticeable change. In the platinum, actually, the change is very small, and it scales with the temperature, which already suggests that the platinum is not very catalytically active for this CO conversion reaction in this system. And you can, because now you can see what's going on, you can look at for example, in the case of palladium, when you have a very faceted nanoparticle, you have a less, or you know that your nanoparticle is not active, and you can tie it to the number of uncoordinated sites. But when a nanoparticle becomes active, or it becomes rounded, now you have since you have many, so here your uncoordinated sites are usually probably sitting at the corners, but here now once your particle becomes rounded, when your nanoparticle is active, you have a lot of uncoordinated sites, and that's why your activity just jumps up. So let me see. Okay, so I'm almost out of time. Maybe for the sake, I'll probably skip the second part. But I just want to say, I just want to mention one thing here. So this is not the only, so you can also, since I started with talking with the bimetallic nanoparticles, you can actually look at the different types of bimetallic nanoparticles, see how they evolve during, again, the system model CO oxidation reaction. So this is just a nanoparticle where a platinum frame is segregated from the nickel body of the nanoparticle. So we synthesize, so it has this kind of rods of platinum, and then it's embedded in the body of a nickel. And if you look, what you can do, you can really see how the transition is happening. So this is again in situ imaging at the different temperatures. What you see, you can increase the temperature, or you can increase the gas composition. So this kappa means is just increasing the gas, the ratio of this CO to oxygen, and you can monitor the catalytic activity. But again, here you see all these subtle structural changes. So what happens is when you start a reaction, the first thing that happens is your nanoparticle, its phase segregates. So the nickel ends up on the surface, the platinum core phase segregates, or sometimes in some cases you also form voids. And I don't know if you can see here, but here you also have, here for example, you have voids, but some nanoparticles don't have voids. So there are two possible outcomes. And voids can be attributed, can be explained through the Kirkendall effect that I talked about earlier. But the key thing is you end up phase segregating, and the surface is mostly nickel oxide, and the platinum, most of the platinum is segregates into the center. You can do in situ diffraction. That's a beauty. You can switch between imaging mode, diffraction mode. So there's a lot of things you can do, right? So calorimetry, so monitor the reaction. You can take the images. You can do diffraction while your reaction is going on, and you can unequivocally show that the nickel oxide shell starts forming as the reaction happening, right? So the shell that I showed you earlier, it has an oxide, but you can also verify it through the diffraction, what type of nickel oxide and what's happening to your nanoparticle. And in diffraction, you can vividly see how the spacing or how the thermal expansion is going. So you can see that there is a shift in the peak. So it also tells you that as you heat up the nanoparticle, there is a thermal expansion is going on. So I'm not going to go into too much of the details, but you can also then you can do the comparison. So you have now we do the platinum nickel alloy. It's not a segregated particle, but it's alloy. Again, when you start the catalytic reaction, what we find quite uniquely, it segregates out. So platinum and the nickel part of this nanoparticle really nicely segregates out, but it also, again, shows the same activity. We did the control experiments where we just run basic platinum, where we just run basic nickel, almost no activity, very little activity for the platinum and almost no activity for the nickel. Okay, so at this point, I guess I already went over my time, so I'm just going to end and then thank my group members and just two amazing collaborators who helped with us, with the modeling and the funding agencies.
So thank you, Utkur, for that great presentation. What, in your opinion, the unique features of the climate system enabled your research?
So in the climate, I think actually we were kind of, so when CV showed me that he can do this calorimetry experiment, that was not something we planned. That's a feature I find quite unique, and actually we are using it for some of the new manuscripts we are preparing. So I think the ability, not only, so now, it's supposed to be like you can only monitor what's the reaction and then what's happening, or you can visually monitor what's happening to your nanoparticle or materials, or what's happening to your reaction, what is reactants and products. But now you have another, I guess, not dial, but another readout where you can really see exactly at which point the reaction kickstarts, at which point the reaction, dies out. So that's something that's I found quite useful, because we are writing multiple papers on this, and I think this is going to be the key feature of the papers that are going to come out.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Well, we actually we have a question just popping up right now from Mark Willinger.
Hello, Utkur. Thank you very much for this nice presentation. I have just one question about this palladium particle that you showed during CO oxidation. There seemed to be something on the surface, and I was wondering if there could be palladium oxide, or did you identify what it is?
So that particular one, palladium oxide does form on the surface, but that particular one is not. It's kind of amorphous, so we think it might be just CO or building up. Palladium oxide does form on the surface during the reaction, but it does not change. So it's in a very few particles we can identify just from the lattice fringes when it's a crystal oxide. we can identify that it is a palladium oxide. But in many cases, it's actually there is no detectable oxide. In this specific case, we think it's some carbonaceous material that might be building up on the surface because it was really amorphous. When you do the experiment with, for example, rhodium, you see clearly oxide formation on the surface.
Very interesting. And when you say specifically, so you saw oxide formation only on some particles. Could you find any correlation?
In some palladium particles, so I can't tell you, but it's a very few. So actually, we documented it in the paper. So I don't know exactly the number, but on a few particles we see the oxide. But this oxide does not change when the C oxidation reaction happens, right? So it stays on that crystalline oxide remains in the inactive state. That's why we don't think that this surface oxide plays any role in the catalytic process.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we have another question from Dogan Oskaya from Johnson Matthey in the UK.
Yes, hi.
Hello.
The question that I wanted to ask you, it seems that most of your systems that you are trying with nanoparticles are quite idealized systems where you have just nanoparticles on carbon support or silicon nitride support. I'm not so sure what it is, but most of the real life catalyst samples, the particles are always supported on a support, if you know what I mean. It's like alumina. Yeah. What would be very interesting from an industrial point of view, I'm just trying to get to real catalyst sort of things, would be actually try some of these nanoparticles supported by alumina, let's say, and then add a little bit of series zirconia. I'm just sort of trying to make it more relevant for catalysis in real life in general. Have you tried any of those experiments with supported catalysts?
Okay, so yeah, that actually was a very good comment. Actually, this is the questions I ask, not just myself when I referee the papers too, right? So this is the short answer is right now we only focus on the metal nanoparticles. And did we try doing the other support materials? Yes, and most of the support materials are very beam sensitive, and at elevated temperature, that actually the sensitivity increases. So right now, what we're trying to do is actually develop the imaging method, but we can get a very low dose, but at the same time, we still can get meaningful data. So far, my postdoc tried with cereal oxide, and we can really see when we heat it up under atmosphere pressure, you start slowly chewing up the material. So that would be the next thing, is like really figuring out how to image it without damaging the support, because to be able to tell anything about the support, you really need to go to high resolution, and that requires quite high doses. And I completely agree with you, and I share your skepticism when it comes, but I think it's not that far away.
It's not skepticism at all. It's great what you're doing, don't get me wrong. Overall, I think whatever conclusions you have are absolutely on the right track. There's no doubt about that. But what I would like to shift the focus is a little bit towards real life catalysis, because this is what we do in general, and we would like to see more results towards that interaction, because some of the things that you show, for example, the way that the carbon monoxide actually shapes the crystallography on the surface, I'm not so sure whether that would happen if that palladium was sitting on alumina support, for example, which is what you would have in a normal autocatalyst. You know, that would be an interesting observation, because I don't think that would happen, in my opinion. But that's interesting to see overall. It's on us.
Yeah, I think the next thing that needs is imaging, right? So we have to, because now the cameras are getting better, so you can gradually reduce the dose, and I think it's within the reach with this single electron detectors. It is becoming possible. So I mean, I don't know when, but at some point, I think it's just now a matter of instrumentation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have another question by Valentin Adrian from Romania. Now, he doesn't have a working microphone, unfortunately, but I will ask his question for him. First, he would like to thank you for the interesting presentation. And he asks, how do you manage to cancel or cope with the sample drift during heating?
So actually, with this climate chips, the drift is not so bad. It's more or less very gradual drift, so you can compensate for it. But you also use a high speed rate camera, so we can record the images at a few hundreds frames per second, so we can always drift correct. So it's not an issue for us because you can drift correct and then average, and then you get a very crystal clear images.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. So next we have Patricia. So she actually does have a working microphone, so I will unmute you.
It's Patricia Kooijman in Cape Town here. Thanks for a very nice presentation, lots of different interesting subjects. If you don't mind, I'd like to come back to Dugulan's question very briefly, because Dugulan, actually what we're doing is we're using the, mainly silicon nitride, sometimes silicon carbide of the windows as a support material. So there is some support effect there, but not maybe of the commercial support. My question actually is on the gold-silver system that you showed, the galvanic replacement, because your slides briefly mentioned the deposition of silver chloride, but you didn't really discuss that. And I'm wondering how you can actually create a void, because I would expect the chlorine to also diffuse inside and deposit silver chloride solid everywhere, because it dissolves very badly in, especially in water, but even in acidic solutions, it doesn't dissolve very well.
Yeah, so silver chloride salts actually, yes, solubility is not high, and then you can see them precipitating. So the shell is actually not just gold and it's not just gold and silver, but it's a silver chloride is also present here. It precipitates out, because if you look at the map here,
yeah, I saw that
elemental map. So you do have a chlorine, so it does not dissolve fully.
Okay, but if you look at those elemental maps, it's a bit small. The red is the gold.
Let me. So the red one is gold. Green one is a silver.
Because there it does seem as if the silver, at least the chloride, is on the inside of the gold. If you look at those elemental maps.
Inside, you mean
That
here?
chloride, that chloride square is much smaller than the gold square. So there would be silver chloride inside as well, which is logical, but you did touch on it.
Yeah. So I guess gold is on the so the concentration of silver is slightly higher at this interface when it initially starts depositing.
Yeah.
So this one is inside of this one, and this is so it matches with silver, right? So I mean silver and the silver outer interface of the silver and the gold here. It has a silver chloride distinctly here. So here you have a silver chloride, yes, and you have a very diffuse silver and gold, very rich gold. But you do have a chloride at the interface, because it cannot, it does not, even at the 90 or 70 degrees in this particular case, it is still present and does not dissolve fully.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Patricia. Now we actually have no questions remaining. So I guess that's it for the session. I wanted to thank you, Dr. Utkur, for your great presentation, and for everybody for joining. I really hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you for our next upcoming webinars. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this Nanotalk. To stay informed about our webinars, I invite you to follow us on our social channels, LinkedIn and Twitter. I also invite you to sign up for our monthly newsletter in which we share interesting in situ research and technological innovations. Finally, I want to thank you very much for watching and hope to meet you at one of our next webinars.